Hello there. Well, the big day is almost here, and I'm here to help you effectively manage your 3 hours that you're going to spend at your exam. My name is Venkat, and I'm here to try and help make time and space your friend instead of you fighting it. So, the big day is here. You have 3 hours to write this exam. You have to go to the classroom, you have to go to the center where you have to take your exam, and it's all about those 3 hours in that room, sitting at that bench and writing that exam. Nothing else matters. Not what happened before that, not what's going to happen after that. All the studies and the preparation that you've done have led up to this moment. And this moment is what matters, here and now, when you're sitting down to write this exam for 3 hours. So it's very, very important that we bring our focus, our mind, down to the present, here and now. These 3 hours, this room, that's it. It doesn't matter how your morning went, whether you studied enough, whether how last week was, and it doesn't matter what's going to happen after, whether you're going to go have lunch, who you're going to meet after your exam. None of that matters right now. It's just this. Think of it this way. If you had Virat Kohli or Mithali Raj going out to bat, right? And it's a really important match and they have to bat really well. What do you think they're thinking about? What are they focusing on at that moment? That ball that's going to come towards them. That moment in that match. They're not thinking about, do I need to buy vegetables in the grocery shop after this to take home? What am I going to cook for lunch? Oh, I met my friend this morning and I should, catch up with them after the game. They're not thinking about any of that. They're thinking about this moment, what's the next delivery going to be like? And that's what we have to do. We just have to focus right here, right now. And that's what this session is going to be about. I'm going to give you some nice little tips and tricks that will help you do much, much better. Maximize your focus, maximize your preparation, and maximize your performance in those 3 hours at the exam center. So these are really cool tips, and I'm very excited to share them with you. Let's see what they're like. Now, the first thing and the most important thing actually starts before the exam itself. I'll give you an example. I like to go cycling, and I leave sometimes very early in the morning to go for a cycle ride because that's when it's cool, there's not much traffic. Now, in order to cycle, I need to have my shoes ready, my cycling gear ready. My cycle should be ready. I need to check that there's air in the tires, there's oil on the chain. I need to have my morning snack before I leave. I have to carry a water bottle. Now, this is all a checklist that I need to do so that I can get up in the morning and just ride my cycle. And so I do all of this checklist the previous evening. I make sure that my cycling clothes are out, my shoes out and socks, my snacks are ready, my water bottle's filled. I've checked all of that before I go to sleep the previous night, so that when I wake up in the morning, I'm not wasting time by, pumping air into the tires or scrambling and looking for a banana. Nothing. I'm just ready to change and go. And that's what a pre-checklist really helps doing. Because a pre-exam checklist for you, in the case of an exam, includes things like, is your admit card with you? Are you carrying your hall ticket? Do you have your ID proof? You don't want to show up and then not be recognized because you don't have an ID proof. Is your pencil box filled with all the important things? Do you have your pens? Do you have two extra pens? Do you have 2 black pens, 2 blue pens? In case one pen breaks or runs out of ink, you have a backup. Do you have your scale, your ruler, your pencils, 2 pencils, an eraser, a sharpener for those pencils, your compass in your geometry box? And then are you carrying a water bottle, a transparent water bottle? Are you carrying your mask and your sanitizer in case that's required at the venue? I think it's a good idea to carry those. Now, this is all your checklist. You have to carry this to the exam center. So instead of waking up in the morning and in the rush of getting to the exam center, packing everything and then forgetting something, why don't you pack it the previous night? Just put everything into your bag, keep the bag ready so that when you wake up in the morning, you can focus on getting ready, on showering, on eating your breakfast, And then when you're ready to go, you just pick up the bag and leave because you did all the work the previous evening. So that's what I'm suggesting here. Your pre-exam checklist, it's actually very important to have this checklist written down. So if you want to take it down now, that's a great idea. If you want to work on it after this session, just to make sure you know what you need to carry. And so you have the checklist ready. And the night before every exam, you can just check the checklist and keep everything ready. So the pre-exam checklist, very, very important, even before the exam. Now, there are some very great quotes about how to be ready. Like this is a great one. I really like this one. If I had 8 hours to chop down a tree, I would spend the first 6 sharpening my axe. So think about it. If you had a tree that you needed to cut down and you immediately went and started trying to chop it down, if your axe is blunt, then you could spend all 8 hours and still not cut down the tree. But if you sharpened your axe for the first 6 hours and it's really sharp and it's in great working condition, then when you go down to chop down the tree, it's going to fall easily because you prepared well. And so that's the other quotes that I really like. Preparing well prepared is half the battle won. If you're well prepared, you've already done a lot of the hard work. Now it's just about going out there and getting it done. There's another one that I really like, which is failing to prepare is preparing to fail. If you're not ready, there's a good chance you're going to fail because you're not creating the best situation for yourself to succeed. So the idea is all about preparing well. And that's what all these tips are about today, of making sure that you're spending your time sharpening your axe so that when it comes time to chop down that exam paper, you're ready. So let's now move into the actual time breakup of what your day looks like when you're at the exam center. We're going to break this up into 4 sections. You basically have 3 hours and 15 minutes. There's an extra 15 minutes over and above the 3 hours for the paper. And that actually comes at the start. So as soon as you walk in, let's say your exam is at 9 o'clock in the morning, right? That's when you're supposed to start. Then at 8:45, there's a good chance that you're going to get your question paper, which means you need to be there by 8:30. So if it's a 9 o'clock paper, I highly suggest you go there by 8:30. Go there half an hour early, just so that you're not rushing, right? The idea is to be cool and calm and collected because we're making the time and space our friend. Instead of fighting the time and space, we want to work with it so that we can do the best that we can. So the first 15 minutes is actually the time that they give you the question paper, and you can just read it. You have to do nothing else. You just have to read the question paper. Now, even that 15 minutes, we can use it actively. We're going to do some active reading, and here's tips as to how to best utilize those first 15 minutes. Now, as soon as you get the question paper, just read the instructions carefully. And these are instructions that are usually at the start of the paper and at the start of each section, each question. And they contain some very useful information. Like they'll probably tell you how many marks are in that section, in that question paper, how the question paper itself is divided, how many sections there are, the time that you have for each maybe, what kinds of questions are there. Are there 1 mark, very short answers? Are there long answers? So there's a lot of very useful information in all the instructions in the question paper. So read the instructions carefully. You don't want to miss out some important instruction that could affect your performance later, right? So read the instructions carefully. Then read all the questions and the choices carefully. Just read everything. Read all the questions. Don't think about trying to solve questions immediately. The idea is to just familiarize yourself with what kinds of questions are there in the question paper so that you know what you're going to be attempting. Then once you've read the questions and the choices carefully, you should be able to categorize the questions into sure shot, things that you're absolutely certain about and you can solve it, and into uncertain or challenging questions that you're not so sure about, but you think maybe if I work on it, it could work, that sort of thing. So once you categorize these questions and find a way to just mark for yourself which questions you're absolutely certain about and which questions are a little bit challenging for you. Now, what this enables you to do is that you've now separated the easy questions for you, the sure shot, certain questions, from the harder, tougher, more difficult, more challenging questions. And because then when you come in to attempt the paper, you know which questions to go for first, the easier ones, because then you can start off well. Right? So categorize the questions into easy or challenging. And the idea is to keep the challenging questions for the last, so that you start off well, get a good pace going, answer a lot of questions, and get your confidence really going. If you start well, then you'll just feel much better as you go through the paper because you're starting to get a lot of answers right. So start with the easy ones and keep the challenging ones for last. Unless, of course, you know the answers to all the questions, they're all easy for you, then just attempt them in the direct order. Okay, so that's the first 15 minutes, right? Now the 15 minutes are up and you're now given answer sheets. And now your 3 hours of answering the paper has officially started. Ooh, so do you attempt all the questions right away? Do you write down the answers? No, you remember that thing about spending 6 hours to sharpen the blade, sharpen the axe? That's what we're going to do. We're going to split that 3 hours into 3 sections. 5 minutes at the start of the exam, 160 minutes or 2 hours and 40 minutes during the exam, and then 15 minutes at the end of the exam. We're splitting it up into 3 sections because we want to start well, we want to do well, and we want to finish well. All 3 of them are important: starting, doing, and finishing well. So let's now look at the first 5 minutes. You've been given the answer sheet. What do you do? Well, you don't immediately start writing the answers. Instead, what you do is you can now start writing on the answer sheets. So when you went through the question paper and you saw the questions, there would be some questions that would require formulas or little keywords that are important, like, dates or years in SST or formulae in maths. Think of these as clues for you. When you come to answer that question, maybe 1 hour into the exam, those clues that you've written next to the question could actually be really useful. Because when you come to the question, you'll see the formula and you'll know, oh, this is how I thought I could solve it. Or you'll see the year, the keywords that are required for you to think in that way. Because you're thinking about the answer now and you're like, yeah, I can totally solve this. But 1 hour later, when you come to that question, maybe you'll forget how you wanted to solve it or what ideas you had to answer that question. So that's why write down these little clues, these little keywords across the questions, formulae, years, dates, all of that. Don't write the entire answer. Just sprinkle some keywords here and there so that they act as clues when you come back to that question later. So that's the first thing. The second thing, presentation is very, very important. Think about the person who's actually going to correct your paper. Now, do you think that they would like to see a nice, clean, neat paper? That's a joy to correct. Or do they want to see a messy paper where they can't make sense of where the answer is, where the rough work is, where one question ends and the next answer begins? Do they want to see a messy paper or do they want to see a clean, neat paper? They would want to see a neat paper. And therefore, presentation is very important for your paper. And you can make sure that you get neat presentation very quickly, just by drawing margins. Draw a margin out on the left, draw a margin out on the right for your rough work. If you separate out your rough work from your fair answers, your main answers, it becomes much easier for the person who's correcting it to know, okay, this is what I need to correct. And this part is just rough work. I don't need to correct it. I don't need to look at it. It makes his job much, much easier. And therefore, you create a good impression on the person who's correcting your paper, and they start to enjoy correcting your paper, which is good for you. So, draw some margins, at least for the first few pages, so that you can start out neatly. And Start with the absolutely certain questions, the easy ones that you know how to answer. Start with that so that you start off well and you can get a good speed going in. Okay, so that's your 5 minutes at the start of the exam. Now you've started well. Let's now get into the chunk of the 160 minutes that you're actually going to attempt the paper and answer all the questions. Now, 160 minutes, you'll notice that actually there is 160 minutes and your paper is usually about 80 marks. This translates to 2 minutes per mark. Now, this is a guide. It's not an actual rule. It's just something for you to think about and keep in mind. Now, the 160 minutes, we're going to give you 3 tips that you can actually use to be able to handle these 160 minutes better. You can break it up nicely. The first one is balancing speed and accuracy. Now think about this. You're driving really fast. You've got a great car, you've got an empty road, and you're driving really fast in the wrong direction. Absolutely no use, right? You need to go that way, but you're going this way very quickly. So speed without accuracy isn't going to help you. If you're making a lot of mistakes, but you're answering the questions really quickly, but you made mistakes, then it doesn't help you. Similarly, accuracy. Now, you can pursue perfection. Make sure that your answers are absolutely perfect. Check it 2, 3, 4 times. Ensure that your margins are so straight and your handwriting is so neat that it doesn't spill out of the lines. All that is accuracy, but it's going to take you forever to do that. You've lost speed in the pursuit of perfection. Remember, we're not trying to be perfect. That's why I always say practice makes you better. I don't say practice makes you perfect because we're not trying to be perfect. We're just trying to be better. And so the idea here is to just balance out speed and accuracy. You need to be able to work pretty quickly, work fast enough, but also make sure that you're not making silly mistakes. Make sure that you're not trying to make everything so perfect that you're so slow. You're balancing out speed and accuracy. Remember that it's better to get 6 out of 8 questions right rather than getting 4 out of 10 questions right. You can attempt 8 questions and get 6 of them right, so you're balancing speed and accuracy. But if you attempt 10 questions and get only 4 right, then you've gone too fast and you've got your accuracy wrong. So it's better to have 6 out of 8 than to have 4 out of 10. Okay, balancing speed and accuracy is your first tip. The second tip, keeping a track of time. Now remember what I said about the guide of 2 minutes per mark. 80 mark paper, 160 minutes to attempt it. So you know that after 5 marks, it should be 10 minutes has gone by. If 30 minutes are over, that means you should have attempted about 15 marks. Now, this is a rough guide for you. It's not a strict rule. So if you're a little bit off here and there, don't worry about it so much. It's just for you to, keep a track of where you are. So after you've answered a lot of questions, you can look up at the time and be like, oh, okay, 40 minutes are done and I have attempted 20 marks. So I'm going at a pretty good pace. That's all it is. It's just for you to keep a track of where you're doing, how you're going. If, for instance, after 50 minutes of the paper, you've only attempted 15 marks, then you know that maybe you're going a little slowly and you need to balance that speed and accuracy a little better. Whereas if only 20 minutes are done and you've already attempted 40 marks, then you know you're going maybe too fast and maybe there are maybe you've made some silly mistakes. So go back and check those answers later. You don't need to go fast, just slow down a little bit. Okay, so this is just a little trick, a little tip for you. Keeping track of time, 2 minutes per mark is your guide. The third one is to avoid thinking too much on a question. Now, you might ask me, how much is too much? Well, I think you'll just know it. For instance, if you get stuck on a question and you've spent 5 and 10 and 15 minutes, and it's only a 3-mark question or a 4-mark question, then chances are that you're starting to get stuck and you're thinking too much on that question. And you should probably just let it go and move on. You can come back to it at the end if you have time. But it's very important to not lose the momentum that you have. At the same time, don't get flustered if you feel like you've spent too much time on a question. Actually sit down, think about the question, and if you feel like you can't do it, it's okay. Remember, we're not chasing perfection. We're not looking for perfect answers across all answers. We're looking for a better performance, how to better your performance. So if this question is stumbling you, it's tripping you up, just move it to the side and move on to the next question. And you can come back to it later if you have time. Now, actually, if you've only spent a couple of minutes thinking about the question and you don't know how to answer it yet, that's not too much. 2 minutes, 3 minutes on a question while you're trying to figure it out isn't too much. Once it starts pushing beyond for a much longer period of time, that's when you know, shucks, I'm spending too much time on this question. It's time to move on. It's okay to get stuck. Don't worry about it. Just move on. Okay, so that is breaking up of the time. Now, there's a very important thing that I want to mention at this point, and that actually comes back to our thing about thinking too much. It's also about writing too much, which we'll talk about as we get into our last 15 minutes when we look at the end of the exam. So we've started well, we've done well, now we have to finish well. Finishing well is really important. Have you ever seen these videos of these races where this person is running and he's right up at the front, he's going to win the race, and then he starts celebrating too early before he's finished the race. He starts celebrating, he gives high fives to everybody, he slows down, he celebrates, and then somebody comes from behind and overtakes him right before the finish line and defeats him in the race. So the idea is to finish well as much as you've done well and started well. Until the race is over, until the 3 hours is done and you've given your paper in, the exam is not over, right? Finish the exam and then you can celebrate. So let's look at how to spend these last 15 minutes to finish well, to close the paper nicely. Again, there's a checklist here. This is a post-exam checklist. Now, the post-exam checklist is very, very important. Make sure, for instance, that your answer sheets are in order. In the correct order. You don't want to be reading page 1, 2, 3, 7, 8, 9, 4, 5. You don't want that mess up to happen, because remember, the person who's correcting your paper, make his job easy. You don't want him to search for which is the correct order of sheets. So make sure that your answer sheets are in the correct order. Make sure that things like graphs and maps, if you've used any of these, are attached. Again, don't miss out things like graphs and maps because they're very, very important attachments. I want you to check your roll numbers and your hall ticket number. So any numbers that you have to write down, your identity, your name, your roll number, your hall ticket number, make sure that all of those are in the paper. What's the point of writing a full answer sheet if you've forgotten to write your name and number? Then the person who's correcting it won't know whose paper it is and you won't get your marks. So check things like roll numbers and hall ticket numbers. Revise your answers. If there are any questions that you want to go back to at this point, you have your 10-15 minutes at the end. So just go back to the questions, go back to the ones that you've answered. Make sure that you've not made any silly mistakes. You've not forgotten to write the correct unit, for instance, or you've not forgotten to write the answer. Make sure that all your answers that you've already written down are in correct order, are written well. There's not any missing information. If you still have time after that, Then you can go back and try any of the questions that tripped you up, that you couldn't answer, and see if maybe you'll get an idea at the end of the paper. But that's only after you've done all of this. The paper that you already have, it's very important to make sure that that's okay. So answer sheets in order, graphs and maps are attached. Check your roll numbers, your name, your hall ticket number, and revise all the answers that you've got. And finally, when you're done with your 15 minutes and you're going to hand in your paper and leave, this is really important. Collect your admit card, ID, your hall ticket, whatever papers and ID and stuff that you brought in. Remember to pack it all back and take it out, because you'll need it the next day for the next exam. And if you leave your hall ticket here, and it gets lost, I don't know how you're going to get a replacement hall ticket in time before your next exam. So make sure that you pack everything and leave. Take everything with you. Sometimes you've had a really great paper, or you've had a really bad paper, and you just want to leave. You just want to go out and see your friends and talk about the questions that you were able to answer, that you weren't able to answer. And in that hurry, you might leave your hall ticket under the bench or on the seat next to you. Make sure that before you leave, just turn around, make sure you've collected everything, put it in your bag and leave. So collect your admit card, your ID, your hall ticket before you leave. So this is your last 15 minutes at the end of the paper. You're now finishing well, and you've now finished your paper. Great, congratulations. 3 hours and 15 minutes is done. Now, that was about how to utilize that time really well and do a really good job there. Now, I just want to drill down a little bit into each individual answer. How do you write better answers that will make you look good in the paper? Some tips and tricks for that. Okay, the first one, use simple language. If you can explain something like this, please do. If you don't have to go around and try to explain it like that, just because you think that the invigilator wants to read more complex language. No, everybody wants a simple language. Make it easy for the invigilator. So writing complex language in answers does not get you more marks. If you write the answer simply and correctly, you will get the marks that you should get. Writing longer answers for like 2-mark questions isn't going to get you more marks. So at the same time, writing really short answers for 5-mark questions, not a good idea. And so that brings us to our second point, which is adhering to the word limit. If it's a 2-mark answer, write an answer that is appropriate for a 2-mark answer. You don't need to write extra sheets just because you think you know it really well, or you think that the additional information will get you more marks. No. Similarly, for a 5-mark, 10-mark question, please write answers that are appropriate for that question. You can't write a 2-line answer for a 5-mark answer, right? So check the word limit that each question will carry and appropriately answer for that. Then, avoid common mistakes. Avoid silly errors. Now, there's one thing that, when we're texting a lot, or the kind of spoken language that we have, you can't really bring that into the answer paper. You can't use abbreviations. You can't use SMS language. You can't say things like LOL on the paper or ROFL on the paper, because that won't fly. That won't get you marks. That's wrong. So ensure that you read the instructions carefully for each question. Ensure that you use the correct units. If you change kilograms for grams, your answer is wrong. If you mess up the plus sign and the minus sign, your answer is wrong. So make sure that you don't make these silly common mistakes. Sometimes in our hurry to finish the answer quickly, we can mess out on these things. So avoid common errors. And finally, presentation. Write neat and clean. Ensure that your handwriting is legible, that the person can read it. Pay some attention to presentation, draw the margins, separate it out, so that the person who's correcting it can see your answer clearly, can read it clearly, and therefore can give you marks for it. And makes his job easy when he's correcting your paper. If you need to underline the main points in your answer or mark it out or draw a box around it, basically underline the main points, please do that as well. It makes our job easier when we're correcting it. And so that is all the tips that we have on how to do a great performance in those 3 hours in the classroom when you're sitting to write your exam. Let's quickly go over them once. A great performance, in a nutshell, has all of these. A checklist at the start of the exam, pre-exam, and post-exam checklist. Then time management. You have 3 hours and 15 minutes. Your first 15 minutes is about reading the question paper and figuring out which is easy, which is tough questions. Then your 5 minutes, once you get the answer sheet, is to just write your name, your roll number, draw the margins, get ready to answer, basically. Write down clues next to the questions. Then you use 160 minutes at approximately 2 minutes per mark to attempt the questions. And finally, you finish well by making sure your answer sheets are attached in the correct order, graphs and maps are attached. You've written your name, your roll number, your hall ticket number. Things like ensuring that you revise your answers, don't make any silly mistakes, and collect your ID card, your admit card, your hall ticket before you leave. And how to write better answers, writing skills. Use simple language. Don't overcomplicate your answers. Make sure that you stick to the word limit. Write appropriately long answers for the marks that are given. Avoid silly mistakes. Avoid common mistakes. Pay attention to what you're writing. And finally, neat and clean presentation so that your paper is a joy to correct. And this way, you should be able to make time and space your friend and do a fantastic job in that time and space. And leave the outside world outside. Just focus on your paper, focus on the time, focus on doing your best. And so, all the best. I hope you have a fantastic exam and you do really well and you have fun in the process. Well, all the best. I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.